Welcome back to CN Live. This is Season 6, Episode 8, Journalism as Terrorism. I'm Joe Lauria, the Editor-in-Chief of Consortium News.
And I'm Elizabeth Voss.
The adjective Orwellian is becoming wholly inadequate to describe what is now happening in Western democracies, if we can still call them that.
On August 7th, journalist and former UN weapons inspector Scott Ritter, who is a columnist for Consortium News, had his house raided by the FBI in upstate New York. The federal agents removed all his electronic devices and boxes of paper documents, which were Ritter's archives from his work as a weapons inspector in Iraq, which he fears he will never see again. The U.S. Department of Justice is trying to build a case that because of his journalism, protected under the U.S. First Amendment, Ritter is an unregistered agent of the Russian government. According to George Galloway, YouTube has now begun removing the videos of Ritter appearances on Galloway's show, perhaps under direction from the FBI.
And then last Thursday, British journalist Richie Medhurst was arrested and held for nearly 24 hours upon arrival at Heathrow Airport in London. The law under which he was arrested is the UK Terrorism Act, which actually criminalizes opinion. It says, and I quote, "A person commits an offense if he invites support for a prescribed organization, expresses an opinion or belief that is supportive of a prescribed organization, and in doing so is reckless as to whether a person to whom the expression is directed will be encouraged to support a prescribed organization." There was a time not too long ago when such events as this were just among our worst fears, but it's now become reality. We're hoping that Richie Medhurst will join us to discuss what happened to him and what the meaning is of this attempt to stop his journalism. Kathy, can you roll the video of Richie Medhurst telling his story of what happened when he arrived at Heathrow last Thursday?
My name is Richard Thomas Medhurst. I'm an internationally accredited journalist from the United Kingdom. On Thursday, as I landed in London Heathrow Airport, I was immediately escorted off the plane by 6 police officers who were waiting for me at the entrance of the aircraft. They arrested me, not detained, they arrested me under Section 12 of the Terrorism Act of 2000 and accused me of allegedly, quote, expressing an opinion or belief that is supportive of a prescribed organization, unquote, but wouldn't explain what this meant. One officer took my bags, and when I asked why he was still back in the aircraft, I was told, look, mate, you can get nicked right here in front of everyone, or in there, your choice. So I was taken to an adjacent room, patted down, my phone confiscated. I was not allowed to inform my family. Despite being calm and cooperative, I was handcuffed with something that placed my shoulders in an awkward position and my wrists on top of, rather than next to each other. The handcuffs were extremely tight. Despite the police loosening them, they left marks on me for 2 days. The police took me down onto the runway, put me in a police van, essentially a mobile cage, and informed me that everything was being recorded. The van was cramped. I had to struggle the entire time to keep my balance and try not to fall over as we drove to the police station. Now, once inside the station, they searched me again for the second time within 10 minutes. I was told to sit on a bench, remove my shoes, remove my socks. I was told to turn my socks inside out and hold them up for the officers to inspect. They also made me hold up my feet so they could check them as well. The officers took me to a room with UV lights, which they told me is used to catch burglars who are sprayed with something. I have no idea why they did this since they just removed me off of a plane. My suitcase was then opened in the lobby and ransacked. All of my journalistic equipment and devices were seized, including phones, SIM cards, wireless microphones, headphones, even my shoelaces. They later took my DNA as well, my fingerprints, palm prints, and photographed me. I was placed in solitary confinement in a cold cell that smelt like urine. There was barely any light, and the bed, if you can even call it a bed, was simply a small concrete ledge with a paper-thin mattress. The cell had no windows, no heating, no toilet paper. I was recorded 24/7 with audio and video, even when going to the toilet. I had to eat food with a piece of cardboard that you were supposed to fold in two in order to scoop up the meal. The police said that I have the right to inform someone that I'm locked up. So I said, okay, I want to call my family. And then they'd go, well, your calls are withheld because of the nature of the alleged offense. I tried to ask, well, what's the point of a right if you can just randomly withdraw it? Why tell me that I have this right at all? And one of them said something along the lines of, well, it's not an absolute right, it can be waived. Similarly, They said I had the right to know why I was being detained. So I asked again, and the police would say something like, well, we're just the arresting officers. We don't really know. Or this will be explained to you during the interview, or some other generic response. Now, despite the police officers' civility and cheerfulness, I felt that the whole process was designed to humiliate, intimidate, and dehumanize me and treat me like a criminal, even though they must have been aware of my background and that I'm a journalist. I was under surveillance almost the entire time from the moment I was arrested until I was released, be it in the police van, in the station, the cell, all of it. No privacy whatsoever. Many of my requests were also delayed or outright ignored. When I was detained, I asked for water several times. The police would always say sure, but then I ended up waiting hours for a tiny cup of water. I asked if I could have my own clothes because I was in a t-shirt. It was cold and I couldn't sleep. They said they'd give me a pullover, but never did. Although one guard did give me a second blanket. See, you have to nag and nag for the most basic things. And this is why I was afraid that they weren't even going to call a solicitor for me. I was able to see the nurse on one occasion, but on 3 other occasions, when I asked to see the nurse, they'd say yes and then nothing. For many hours, no one in the world knew what had happened to me or where I was. Only the police could call a solicitor for me. I had to ask like 4 or 5 different guards for several hours until I finally received a call. Some of my solicitor's calls did not get through or were not answered. One of the calls, my solicitor was told, would be monitored, and so they simply refused to take it. I asked to speak to the solicitor afterwards when that happened, but I was not allowed to. In total, I spent almost 24 hours in detention. At no point whatsoever was I allowed to speak to a family member or a friend. After waiting 15 hours, I was finally interviewed by 2 detectives. The interview lasted about an hour and a half, maybe something like that. So there's clearly no need to hold me there this entire time. But I believe this was done on purpose to try and rattle me psychologically. That failed. I categorically and utterly reject all the accusations by the police. I am not a terrorist. I have no criminal record. Prior to this incident, I'd never been detained in my entire life. I'm a product of the diplomatic community, and I'm raised to be anti-war. Both of my parents won Nobel Peace Prizes for their work as United Nations peacekeepers. They had a tremendous effect on my worldview and outlook and instilled in me the importance of diplomacy, international law, and peace. I myself am a victim of terrorism. When I attended the British school in Islamabad, the Egyptian embassy adjacent to my school was blown up in a double bombing. I categorically and unequivocally condemn terrorism. I am a Medhurst. My family goes back 1,000 years in this country. I come from a long line of public servants. My father served in the London Metropolitan Police before entering the United Nations. He is an expert and an authority on counter-terrorism who taught me much. My grandfather was in the Royal Air Force during World War II, and his father before him in the British Army in World War I. I perhaps don't have the same career paths as them, but I consider my journalism to be a public service and my way of doing my bit for the country by providing a counterweight to mainstream media. I love my country. I respect its laws and its legal institutions. I get the feeling, nevertheless, that those like myself who are speaking up and reporting on the situation in Palestine are being targeted. I had booked my ticket to London on the same day, and yet an entire team of police were mobilized to arrest and question me. This is why I felt that this was a pre-planned, coordinated arrest. Many people have been detained in Britain because of their connection to journalism. Sometimes under the Terrorism Act, sometimes not. I think of Julian Assange, Craig Murray, Kit Clarenberg, David Miranda, Vanessa Beeley. As far as I'm aware, I'm the only journalist, however, to have been arrested and held for up to 24 hours under Section 12 of the Terrorism Act. Keep in mind the conditions that I outlined previously. The psychological element where you're made to wait endlessly. You've not been told what you're accused of, nor when you'll be questioned. Now, despite having been released unconditionally, I do not feel that my bail is truly unconditional. I'm effectively in limbo, not knowing if I will be charged in 3 months or if I will go to prison. Journalism is my livelihood. I have an ethical and a moral responsibility toward the general public to inform. But I feel that a muzzle has been placed on me. I simply do not know if or how I can work at all during the next months. Palestine, the humanitarian crisis in Gaza, remain the most pressing news story in the world. However, it seems that any statement, no matter how innocent, how factual and well-intentioned, can be skewed and twisted into an offense of the highest order. This is precisely the danger and the absurdity of the Terrorism Act that I have always sought to impress upon the public, long before I ever became a victim of it myself. It is out of control. It has no place in a democracy. Counter-terrorism laws should be used to fight actual terrorism, not journalism. We cannot call ourselves a democracy as long as reporters are dragged off of planes and detained and treated like murderers. I am disgusted that I am being politically persecuted in my own country. Now, as I do not know if I can still report as a journalist for the next months, I kindly ask you for your support during these times. Freedom of the press, freedom of speech really are under attack. The state is cracking down and escalating to try and stop people from speaking out against our government's complicity in genocide. Please stand not just with me, but with the others who are still inside. I know what they're going through, and the best relief is to know that people on the outside are rooting for you and doing everything they can to get you out. Thank you.
We are also joined by now Craig Murray, who's with us. Craig is a journalist and a former British diplomat. He was also detained last year for a lot less time and not formally put under arrest as Richie Medhurst was, but he was detained last year upon arriving in Scotland from Iceland under the same Terrorism Act. So, Craig, thank you for joining CN Live, and thank you for waiting. You mentioned that you've been in touch with Richie since this happened. What do you know about where his legal case stands right now?
Well, he was held for 23 and a half hours and questioned during that period. Under the Terrorism Act, after the first hour, he did have a right to a solicitor, but you don't for the first hour. And at the end of it, he has been, as I understand it, put on police bail. He has been bailed to report back, so he has to return to the UK. He is currently at home in Vienna, I believe. He has to return to the UK in 3 months' time and report to a police station where a further action may or may not be taken. And that, of course, is a very effective way of chilling his journalism for the next 3 months, because everything he writes is going to be under surveillance, or anything he speaks online is going to be under surveillance. And this is really quite scary. He was questioned specifically under Section 12 of the Terrorism Act, which, as you say, criminalizes opinion and refers to support for prescribed organizations. And I presume in this case it's Hamas and or Hezbollah, which are prescribed organizations. But I don't believe he has actually been formally charged with an offence. But he is under investigation and has to report back in 3 months' time.
Now, there was a time when European countries, and including Britain, I believe, did not consider Hezbollah a terrorist organization, while the U.S. always did. And that might have also been with the case with Hamas. Do you know about that, Craig? This is a decision of the government that's elected at the time, right? About whether someone could be arrested for supporting a prescribed organization.
Yes, that's right. It's entirely up to the executive who is and who is not a prescribed organization, and it's entirely arbitrary. If the executive were to state that the Girl Guides is a prescribed organization, you could go to jail. And it's worth stressing that the penalty for supporting a prescribed organization is up to 14 years in prison. This is not a question of a fine. This is 14 years in jail for journalism which sounds like it supports Hamas or sounds like it supports Hezbollah, or is reckless as to whether somebody who reads it may be induced by that to support Hamas or Hezbollah. So, it's extraordinary that governments have quite so much arbitrary power, and the notion that Hamas and Hezbollah are simply terrorist organizations. And I'm not supporting them by saying this, I hasten to add. But the notion that they are simply terrorist organizations and can be dismissed as that, when they plainly are very meaningful players in the Middle East conflict, is a nonsense. Until 2021, only the military wing of Hamas was prescribed, and the political wing was not. Although how you made that differential was not entirely obvious. I didn't actually know this, and in fact, my blog post, which is currently up, my current blog article on this subject, is incorrect on this point, because I only learned this today, which is that in 2021, the UK government made a change, so all of Hamas is considered a terrorist organization, which is extraordinary when you think about it, because that must mean that the administration of the hospitals and schools in Gaza was considered a terrorist organization. In fact, if you were to follow the letter of the law, it seems to me that anybody who donated anything to a Hamas-run hospital in Gaza must have been guilty of support for a terrorist organization in terms of this absurd law. And the absurdities don't stop there by any means.
So let's talk about your article that we've republished on Consortium News from your blog. And you make this strong point that right now it is legal in the United Kingdom to support a genocide in Israel, in Gaza by Israel, but it's illegal to support the organization that has a right under this recent ruling of the ICJ to use force to defend themselves against an occupation. Could you expand on that?
That's absolutely true. If I were to run out into the street now and shout at the top of my voice, I support the Israeli Defense Force, I support the massacre of Palestinians, I hope that every single Palestinian in Gaza is massacred, I will not have committed any offence in UK law. I can publish that on my blog if I wish, but I want every single Palestinian in Gaza to be massacred. Not illegal for me to say that at all. If I were to say that I supported Hamas in their acts of armed resistance to the illegal occupation, that would be something for which I could go to jail for 14 years. And let me hasten to say, I am not saying it. I am giving the hypothetical case of where the law stands, not saying that that is my opinion. And you can support the right of armed resistance of Palestine in general, and I do. I support the rights of armed resistance of the Palestinian people in international law, because it is, and as was re-emphasized by the ICJ on the 9th of July, as is plain from the first protocol to the Fourth Geneva Convention, and as is well established in customary international law and in numerous General Assembly resolutions, it is a right in international law for an occupied people to defend themselves. And that's against a colonial occupation or a racist regime. And of course, the Palestinians are defending themselves against both, and they have that right. And I could find there are a number of Palestinian resistance groups which are fighting the Israelis, which have not been prescribed, purely, I guess, because the UK government hasn't got round to it. But I could choose one of those and say that I support them and their armed struggle against the Israeli people, and that would not be illegal. All of which are things which emphasize the extraordinarily arbitrary law that is being used against journalists. It's being used to terrify journalists and being used against those who support a genocide. And one last point, there are Israeli soldiers coming back from participating in genocide, for participating in acts that resulted in the death of children. And they are coming openly back to the UK and living here, and no action whatsoever is taken against them. Action is only being taken against people who oppose the genocide. And this is, it's unthinkable that a genocide is going on, and those who are being persecuted are not people committing genocide, but journalists who oppose genocide. Journalists who oppose genocide are the chief target of the UK law.
Well, we know there's no First Amendment in Britain, but there is the European Convention on Human Rights, Article 8, I believe it is, that defends the right of free speech. How could this law, and tell me about the genesis of this terrorism law, And has there ever, what caused it? When did it come around? And has there ever been anything like it in British jurisprudence before? Anything like remotely like this, where you're criminalizing belief and opinion?
It was. And it was illegal to broadcast the opinions of the IRA. And we had this long period when the BBC, for example, would have to use actors to voice over Gerry Adams, which was farcical. So there's that kind of precedent. And again, it's a precedent which the government would say was terrorism related, because as with all anti-colonial movements, the IRA was characterized by the British government as purely a terrorist organization. So there is that kind of precedent. This legislation is, of course, post 9/11 legislation brought in the great moral panic that followed 9/11, and is one of many pieces of what I would characterize as anti-civil liberties legislation that the Blair government brought in the wake of 9/11. But the list of prescribed organizations under the Act is open and can be added to, at will by the government, and changes from time to time.
But what is the overall effect on journalism, a law like this? This is something we could only have imagined before.
Yeah, it is. It is quite extraordinary, and it is being used increasingly. Now then, Section 7 of the Act is what is normally used against journalists, and Richard was detained under Section 7 and then arrested under Section 12. Section 7 of the Act deals with transit through port and airports, an airport being a kind of port in terms of the Act. And Section 7 states that if you are detained at a port, you can be detained with no reasonable grounds of suspicion. It actually states the police do not have to have any reasonable grounds to detain you. It states that in the Act. It states that detention is not arrest, and therefore you do not have what the Americans call Miranda rights. You have no right to remain silent. In fact, you must answer all questions in full. Otherwise, that is in itself an offence carrying 2 years imprisonment. You must hand over all of your devices, and you must hand over all passwords to your devices, and you have no right to a solicitor. And that lasts for the first hour. And numerous journalists have been detained under that provision. And most of the dissident British journalists that Consortium News have probably been detained at some stage or other under that provision of their UK citizens. And that would include, for example, myself, obviously, Kit Clarenberg, Johanna Ross of Sputnik TV, Vanessa Beeley. There are largest numbers. John Lockland, who was a pro-Brexit campaigner, he was detained for terrorism under this Act. It really is. It is scores of journalists who've been detained and had all their electronics confiscated and been forced to answer questions. And that, when that was passed through Parliament, it was nothing to do with journalism. The explanation when this Act was passed through journalism for Section 7 and the right to detain people at ports with no normal Miranda right, the explanation given to Parliament was that this was to catch bombers. This was for people who had just planted a bomb on an aeroplane. The Parliament was told, obviously, you have to force them to answer questions for the first hour. They can't withhold information. So they plant a bomb and don't tell you they planted a bomb. That's an offence. and this use of appalling legislation. I mean, even given that was the excuse given for it, it's still appalling anti-civil liberties legislation. The use of this legislation was passed through Parliament on the guise of being against people who had just placed bombs on aircraft, against dissidents who do journalism, is a most astonishing scandal. And one which I think it is essential to get this to the European Courts of Justice. We have tried making complaints about it to the UN Human Rights Committee. I've actively instigated a complaint there with the support of 4 other journalists who've been detained and questioned under this provision. But so far, that's really not got anywhere. And I don't believe any case has yet been got to the European Court. But the problem is, in matters in which the government cries security and cries terrorism, even when that's obviously bullshit, judges by and large are scared. The national security con is powerful, and the European Court is not the vehicle it was. It very seldom returns verdicts against governments. Now, the percentage of cases submitted to it which it hears is ever shrinking and is well below 1%. And the percentage of cases in which it finds against governments is also shrinking. So the legal route to challenge this in our increasingly authoritarian societies is difficult, very, very difficult.
Who would have given the order to target Richie Medhurst? Would that come from the Ministry of Justice? Would the Ministry of Defense be involved? Who would have given this order?
Yeah, it would. It would come from the Home Office, from the Home Secretary, and it would almost certainly be instigated by MI6 or MI5 or both. It would come from the security services saying, we want this guy pulled in. And one of the so-called police who was interviewing him would almost certainly be a security service representative.
So I'm going to give it over to Elizabeth now, but just the law that you described, is it unprecedented in British history to have such a law that targets journalists, apart from what the IRA example you gave?
I think, of course, the law doesn't mention journalists and is not supposed to be used against journalists. It is a bad law being misapplied to journalists because it's such a bad law and so poorly drafted and gives the government such wide powers. I think I haven't studied the texts of the emergency legislation during the course of World War I and II, but unlike, for example, the UK Espionage Act, most of the UK legislation introduced in those circumstances did not survive. It was actually repealed after the war. So my guess is there probably was some kind of similar draconian power available to government during World War II, but in peacetime, no.
It sounds very much like the U.S. Espionage Act. Elizabeth.
Thanks. Craig, I was looking at the provision that, you cited in your article. You had a screenshot of the actual text. And it was really interesting because it uses the phrase reckless rather than intent to, support a prescribed group. And so you don't even have to really intend, you don't have to be proven to have intended to support this group. You just had to basically say something that someone would reasonably interpret as, suggesting that people support this group. And so I wanted to get your comment on that, the fact that they use that specific word as opposed to intent.
No, that's deliberate, the absence of intent, because intent is hard to prove. And so to make it easier to prove, you also don't have to have actually influenced anyone to support. It's not that they have to show that you wrote this and because of what you wrote, somebody supported Hamas. They don't have to show that. They just have to show that you were reckless as to whether they did or not, which is such a low bar. And it is an incredibly low bar. It really is, and deeply scary.
Yeah, and it seems as well that you could, I mean, you said earlier that obviously this was not supposed to be used against journalists. And to take that a step further, obviously, this could be used against anyone speaking in person or on social media or anywhere else on the internet that could be targeted for this. So, I mean, the average person in the UK has to now worry about not only what they post on social media in regards to this, but also what they're even saying to people in private, potentially. Is that right? Am I understanding that correctly?
Yeah, that is true. It could be a conversation in the pub, in which you say, well, I think if somebody during a conversation in a pub were to say, I think given that what the Palestinians have suffered for the last 76 years, that Hamas were justified in attacking Israel. If somebody were to say that during a conversation in the pub, they would be liable for prosecution under this law. So it is, and also, and we're discussing about its use against journalists. I believe it has been used against a number of people on demonstrations for holding placards and signs, including, I think, so I'm not sure whether it ever went to court, but people have been charged under this act for having signs saying "From the river to the sea." And two young girls were charged for having badges showing hang gliders, because that was said to be supportive of the act of the fact that some Palestinian fighters allegedly employed hang gliders during the attack on October the 7th. So it's very wide ranging, and its use against demonstrators, people participating in freedom of assembly, is very worrying. And I think there are undoubtedly victims of this act who are, if you like, less well known and less able to fight back than Richard Medhurst or me, who are probably in jail now. And you've got to see this as part of a broader attack on the pro-Palestinian movement. Within the last week, demonstrators in Scotland who took part in the blockade of an Israeli weapons factory, an Elbit weapons factory, have received jail sentences of up to 3 years. And that's under breach of the peace provisions in Scotland, which is an extremely vague law and very seldom results in that kind of length of jail sentence. So you've got to see this as part of fight back by the authorities who are terrified they've lost control of the narrative. And we're really seeing this authoritarian wave, and not just here in the UK.
Yeah, obviously, as we mentioned in the introduction, that we're seeing this with people like Scott Ritter in the US, who had his passport taken away first, and then had his home raided by the FBI, which was unbelievable to see that play out.
Yeah. And of course, we've seen levels of force used against student demonstrators, which are completely disproportionate.
I wanted to talk to you about October 2023 when you were detained, when you arrived back in Scotland. What did the authorities ask you about? I believe it was about Palestine and a few other issues.
Yeah, I was returning from a WikiLeaks stroke Assange campaign meeting in Iceland. And they asked me kind of 50-50 on WikiLeaks and on Palestine. It wasn't plain why they were detaining me. And I don't think it was actually plain to the people who detained me why they were detaining me. I have a feeling they'd just been told to do it and didn't really understand what was going on. But they did, of course, take my phone and my laptop, which I think was the main object of the exercise. The questions they asked me very largely related to finance, particularly on the WikiLeaks side. They asked me who financed WikiLeaks. They asked me who financed Sunshine Press, which is the Icelandic corporate body which performs a number of functions for WikiLeaks. And they asked me who finances me. They asked me whether I get any money from WikiLeaks, if I get money from Sunshine Press. They asked me if I get any money from the Assange family personally. I told them I don't really get any money from anywhere. I'd be grateful for some if I had any. But there was a heavy financial slant to a lot of the questions. And I've been told by other people who've been detained under the same provision that this was very much their experience too. I found that, Kit Clarenberg of the Grey Zone, for example, said that the questioning focused very strongly on the funding of the Grey Zone, his personal funding, and where the Grey Zone gets its money from. And Joanna Ross, who's ex-Sputnik, she was, again, very closely financed on her personal finances, and now she runs her personal blog. Where is she getting the money from? With a lot of subtext of, are you getting money from Russia? Basically. And I think in retrospect, there's a new National Security Act which came into force here on the 1st of January, which makes it illegal to accept money from foreign sources in order to influence British politics. I don't know exact wording. I can't recall the exact wording. But I think that the questioning was, in some senses, information gathering in relation to that. And given that 4 or 5 people arrested under, or detained, I should say, under the Terrorism Act who've been subjected to this questioning are people whom I know personally and with whom I've cooperated from time to time on things. It looks to me like they're trying to get together some kind of Venn diagram or some kind of picture of funding, and trying to work out that there's some background organization which doesn't in fact exist, or mastermind which also doesn't exist behind all things. I think they're formulating some kind of state conspiracy theory. But then I was also asked questions about Palestine and my support for Palestine.
So in the case with Richie, obviously, if we think it's about Gaza, we can only speculate whether Israel had any involvement in this, but certainly the support of genocide by the British government, by the U.S. government, they are supporting genocide, and they are trying to shut down the voices of anyone criticizing it. This is what we're seeing, and they're using this. My question is, are they using this simply for intimidation purposes? So far, none of the journalists you've mentioned, including yourself or Richie, have actually been jailed or put on trial even, right? This is just an intimidation tactic to get people to try to stop criticizing Israel from slaughtering thousands of Palestinians.
Yeah, I think they're very loath, I think, to put anyone on trial because you get a jury. This is going to be a jury trial. I spent 4 months in jail a couple of years ago for something I'd published, but that was contempt of court, and you don't get a jury. The judge can just send you to jail. This isn't like that. You get to defend yourself, and you get a jury. And with Israel committing genocide, and with the public outrage at the genocide, the chances of getting a jury to agree that journalists should be jailed for opposing genocide, I would say, are probably quite small. And I think they probably calculate that too. So I think the purpose of this is to terrify people. The danger, of course, is that certainly here in the UK, what can happen is if you are charged, they can ask a court to remand you because you're a flight risk, and that would be quite a real danger for me and for Richard because we travel so much internationally. Then you could spend 2 years in jail waiting for your trial before you get to see that jury. And that, I think, is a very real prospect. I remain under investigation for terrorism. That's been ongoing since October. It remains the case that as you can see, I'm prepared to speak in public and to oppose this legislation and to oppose the ridiculous situation where legal acts in international law by the Palestinians, supporting them is criminalized, whereas illegal acts by the Israelis, supporting them is not criminalized. I'm prepared to come out and say all that. In as we've discussed, and as Elizabeth was saying, the act is so widely drawn that they could certainly arrest me and say, oh, well, by saying that the legislation is wrong, you're giving some kind of support to Hamas. They could try to, you're being reckless as to whether this leads somebody to support Hamas. They could try to make some sort of utterly bullshit argument like that, but they could use that to get me charged and then get a judge to say, oh, you're a flight risk, you'd better spend 2 years in jail waiting for your trial. That, it's perfectly possible that could happen. And I am actively, when I was first under investigation for terrorism, I decided to go and live abroad for a few months. And I'm sitting here today back at my home in Edinburgh, actively considering whether I need to leave the country again. And it is intimidating to that degree. It is intimidating to that degree.
So you're still under active investigation? This has not been closed, this case?
Well, they never officially close it, if you see what I mean.
That's the point, isn't it?
That is a point, and that's a point of Richard having to report back in 3 months and that kind of thing. The whole point of it is to keep you in a state of being permanently terrified and to stop people who oppose the genocide from saying anything.
Well, I think you really put your finger on when you said that they're worried that they're losing control of the story, and that's what this is about. They have to know that they're wrong and that the population is turning against them, and the last thing they need are people writing and speaking about that. So this is the tactics they're going to use, but that in itself is something that has to be exposed and written about. And you've done that today in your blog piece. We appreciate that. Craig, thank you for your time. If you have anything you would like to add before we sign off?
No, just, simply that I'd like to refer to something you said at the start, which is it really is very hard to believe this is all happening. We've spoken for years about needing to fight a sort of incoming tide of fascism and a growing lack of interest in civil liberties. And we really are at the stage where they are now coming for us, and freedom is slipping from our grasp.
I always try to imagine what this could happen. And there was something that stopped me to think, well, our leaders are very bad and they're corrupt and they're bought by corporations. But there's something that's going to stop them from going that extra bit. They won't go that far. And I apply the same thing to the possible use of nuclear weapons here. You always had confidence that, especially during the first Cold War, that both sides would know that they couldn't go beyond a certain point and they'd have to stop it. And we saw that with Kennedy and Khrushchev, and against their own hawks were able to stop that. And I've lost this faith, and maybe you have too, Craig, let me know, that mechanism of stopping these leaders has gone, that they are going to cross this red line now. And they are really thinking about nuclear war here with Russia and maybe even with China. I mean, you feel the same way, that we've lost something that was always in our political system that would preserve us from total insanity.
I think the degree of recklessness being shown in the current Ukrainian attack on Russia, in the provision of long-range missiles to Ukraine to be able to strike deep into Russia, and the decision to target those on Russia's nuclear early warning system, which we have seen. You add that together with the incredibly reckless situation where Netanyahu is being allowed to destabilize the entire Middle East in order to commit a genocide and at the same time save his own ass from persecution. The failure to pull back from the brink in any of these situations is absolutely astonishing. And the willingness, as you say, at the micro level, to smash down on their own populations but opposing it is equally astonishing.
Well, I don't very rarely like to use the F word, and I'm talking about fascism, because I think it's a 20th century phenomenon that doesn't exist really anymore in terms of its symbolism and the other aspects of it. So we need a new word maybe to describe what we're having. But you really can't have one without a genocide very well, can you? And there was one in the first fascism, and we've got one now. And I'm still kind of astonished, and I shouldn't be perhaps, because I've been around a while and I've seen a lot of things and quite cynical about government and people in government, having covered so many of them. But I am astonished that these worst fears that we had are being materialized in front of us, and we're not exaggerating, we're not being paranoid. I want to be paranoid, but I don't feel that I am anymore. And I think this was only recently with Craig, what happened with Scott, and now with Richie, this really, for me, ended it. I don't feel paranoid anymore about saying these things.
I agree 100%. It is here. It is now.
Thank you very much for your time, Craig, and we appreciate you speaking to us about that. And we hope to get Richie on.
Hang on, Joe. We've just got Richie Medhurst.
Oh, Richard, welcome. Welcome to the show. So glad that you could join us. What is you said you were, do you have all your devices with you? Were you able to, is that part of the reason why you couldn't join us earlier?
Thanks so much for having me on. It's really an honor. Yeah, that's the reason, because they took my phones, they took my wired microphone, my wireless microphones, they took my headphones. So all of the things I need to work, basically. And yeah, it's impeding me and slowing me down. So I'm sorry for the delay. They even admitted that they didn't need to take them, but they took them anyway. They said, "Oh, the evidence bag is sealed." So if you buy that. Yeah.
Well, so let's, can you give us a much more condensed version of what happened to you? And I'm particularly interested in knowing, if you can discuss it, what questions they asked you. What exactly were they trying to get at, in your view?
Well, I'm not at liberty, unfortunately, to divulge the nature of the questions that were put to me, because I'm out on bail technically. So you know, I could still be charged, and I mean, it is quite astounding. So, you know, we landed, and I already got a gut feeling that something was up when the plane was taxiing and stopped suddenly. Then there were 6 police. One of them was so basically 5 men and 1 woman, and one of the men was dressed in like tactical gear. So, you know, like counterterrorism police. Yeah.
Make it look good. Make it look good. Yeah.
Yeah.
That was real terror.
I knew something was up when they told me to come to the front of the plane. I knew it. And they took my bags. You know, when I asked why, the guy who took my bags was still in the plane. I thought he was maybe doing something with my bags. So I asked, "What's going on?" And then they accused me of stalling. So, you know, I just kept walking. They then arrested me under Section 12 of the Terrorism Act. I think I'm the first journalist to be arrested under Section 12. I know other people have been arrested, but yeah, what a welcome home. Really, just. They put me in handcuffs, despite me being completely calm and compliant. They put me in the paddy wagon, drove me to the station, ransacked my bags in the lobby. You know, they took everything apart, and then booked me and put me in a cell. And it was, I mean, I just want to say something here. Forget me and like my story. I'm speaking in general now. No one should be put in these conditions, even someone who is convicted of a crime. I mean, if you're into archaic punishment, they should not be in these conditions. This was not a cell with a toilet. It was just a toilet. You know, it smelled like urine. The bed is like a concrete ledge. You got a mattress. There's barely any light. They don't turn it off when you sleep. There was no toilet paper. I mean, it's just really barbaric conditions.
Sorry, Richard, this is inside Heathrow Airport, the jail? It's in the airport?
It's Heathrow police station. It's about a 10-minute drive, and you can imagine, with my hands behind my back, you know, I was like almost falling over the whole time, and yeah. So they also gave me special handcuffs with 2 locks, and your wrists, they basically go on top of each other like this, so not next to each other, but on top of each other. And I told them I want to see the nurse because of the marks, so you know it's documented, but that didn't happen. So. I mean, I did get to see the nurse later for something else, but yeah, it's like all the basic things. You know, I would say, for example, can you tell me if you've called a solicitor? Can I have some water? You know, can you tell me why I'm here? I'm cold. Can I have a pullover or something? It's like, can I see the nurse? It's always you have to nag, and then they'll say yes, and then make you wait, or just completely say yes and ignore you. You know, it's
Richard, what was going through your mind when you were in that van going over, and then when they threw you in the cell? Before you talked to them, what were you thinking?
I found it outrageous.
What was happening? What do you think was happening to you?
I found this outrageous. I mean, if you're arresting someone for terrorism or, you know, alleged terrorism offenses, you have an idea of their background and who they are and what they've done or supposedly done. And they know very well, you know, I'm a journalist. They know very well You know, my parents are part of the diplomatic community. I mean, my father is an authority on counterterrorism. You know, the idea that I support terrorism is ridiculous. It's absurd. And I knew I'm being targeted for my journalism. You know, I felt like they're trying to make an example out of me. And you know, I even said, like, if you want to question me, let's just get on with it, basically. You know, like, there's no need to book me and put me in the cell, because I stayed there almost 24 hours. Not in the cell 24 hours, but you know, in general in the station. Yeah, most of the time in their solitary confinement. And you're watched the whole time. You can't even go to the toilet, you know, I mean, without being recorded. You know, and there's no toilet paper either. I didn't bother asking because you know, I just assumed that, you know, it's going to be like with the water and all these things. So yeah, just, you know, once again, I want to put this into context that even if you think that someone has done something wrong, they should not be put in these conditions. I find this barbaric. I find this very authoritarian and designed to humiliate. And I saw other people being arrested in the station. You know, they were people of color. They you know, one of them was on drugs or something. The guy, you know, people who are not doing well, they need to be in hospital. They need to be with doctors and nurses taking care of them, not thrown in you know, some rat hole like this that's going to make them feel even worse. I don't understand the logic behind any of this. And when I was in the jail cell, you know, I felt like because they wouldn't tell me, right? But just to be clear, they would not tell me what I had done exactly. They just named the law. They said Section 12. I didn't know what Section 12 is. I thought it was Schedule 7 that they were arresting me under. I thought they were going to question me immediately and all these things. So, you know, just to be clear, I spent like, I don't know, 13, 14, 15 hours until I was finally questioned. And it lasted just, you know, an hour and a half. So there was no need for this. If they had just invited me or, you know, sent a letter, I would have come down. You don't have to humiliate me and drag me off of a plane.
But they
But
did.
they wanted to
That's
show.
maybe the point, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, they're targeting me because of my journalism. They want to make an example out of me. They're escalating on all fronts. And, you know, all I've done, I'm just trying to provide a counterweight to mainstream media. What's the point of sounding like mainstream media? We don't need more journalists who sound like mainstream media. Now, I'm not obviously trying to be contrarian just for the sake of it.
Right.
But, you know, I feel like I feel the mainstream media are dishonest. So all I'm doing is just trying to shine a light on an issue that is very important, on the Palestinian issue, which Britain caused in the first place, you know, almost 100 years ago. And Britain is still involved in that. So, you know, I have a duty as a journalist to talk about this because it's the most pressing news story. And also as someone who's British, I owe this to the Palestinians to try and make up for what Britain has done to them.
So you have no doubt that that's the particular journalism that they are concerned about.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I've been trying to figure out like what exactly ticked them off, because recently, the most recent things I did, I talked a lot about this gang raping scandal in State Iman. I did an investigation on the Olympic athletes, Israeli Olympic athletes, and how they were, you know, violating the neutrality and peace mission of the Olympic Charter. And I also talked about something I can't remember. Yeah, the massacres. I mean,
The twins. You talked about the twins and
Right.
the birth certificate and
that was
I
heartbreaking.
mean, that was so low. I mean, low key. In fact, you appeared to
Not
be
the
very
rapper,
sad.
the rapper, your mood. Yeah.
Yes, you weren't antagonistic. You weren't. That was the last report you did before this happened. And I wonder if that had something to do with it. It just didn't even make sense.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I can't really put my finger on it because I'm also not allowed to talk about the questions specifically. But I think just generally speaking, they don't like my reporting because for them it's like I'm a class traitor. You know, I went to all the right schools. I was supposed to maybe become a diplomat or something, and I'm using all my tools to tell the truth instead of, you know, become a liar for the FCO. So.
Oh, I think they don't like that more than like Craig Murray. We just had Craig on before you came here, and Craig is considered a class traitor as well. He was diplomat, and what he's doing now. Were you surprised? I'm sure in the back of your mind, and all of us now who are in media that is dissident, we never imagined. I'm older than you, obviously, so I go back, and I could never. We always feared that someday in a Western country, they could be the knock on the door, right? They can actually come and get you at 3 a.m. because something you wrote, because what you wrote is threatening their power, their interests. And I always, and Craig agree with me, we kind of dismissed that won't really happen here, and now we're seeing that it is happening now. So I'm wondering, you couldn't be completely surprised by this, but what was in the back of your mind? Did you ever fear that this would ever happen to you?
I'm not quite sure how I should answer that, or if I should answer that, because I'm still being investigated. But I suppose I could maybe quote something that other people said, perhaps, just as it's not me saying this, but they basically said that if you do get arrested nowadays, that you're probably doing something right as a journalist, so you probably expect it, if I could put it that way.
In general, I'm speaking about the state and the freedom of speech and the media, and that what's separated, what they continuously told us and still tell us, that it's those other countries, China, Russia, Iran, not Saudi Arabia, of course, because they're friends with them, but those countries that they don't like, they're the ones that will knock on the door at 3 a.m. because you wrote an article they don't like, and they're going to let you know about it. Former Soviet bloc, etc. And growing up during the first Cold War, I didn't necessarily believe that the U.S. was the most wonderful place in the world, but we didn't think this would really happen here. So I'm just asking, in general, you think this is happening now here?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Joey and Kathy, I mean, all of you recall quite well how Julian was persecuted. I mean, that by itself was, that's the open and shut case of fascism. I mean, if there ever was one. So I guess, I don't want to sound naive or something like that, but I guess I did have this kind of thought that, surely they won't go that far, because already what they did to Julian was a scandal, and we just finished with that. But now you can see a clear escalation, and the fact that they arrested me, they didn't detain me, they arrested me and put me in a jail cell, I mean, in a freezing urine, stinky place. I mean, yeah, it's really that bad now. It's like something, as you said, you would expect from the stereotypical bad countries. Well, I have bad news for everyone. It turns out we're the bad ones.
Well, exactly. I mean, it's something, again, I didn't think would happen. And it does show that they're reading what we write. It's having an impact. It also shows the weakness of their own positions, whether they are conscious of it or not. I think some people in government and in the establishment are very conscious and are very cynical. They know exactly that they're supporting a genocide. And how do they know it's a genocide?
They know.
But they're maybe, they're pretending they're asking for the ceasefires. We're seeing in the American Democratic Party trying to not lose their base. We've just lost Richard. You're back?
No, he's back.
Okay. So they know the weakness of their position. And what we are writing here, and I'll just speak generally, so we're not talking about necessarily your case, is something that worries them. And we've seen inklings of this happening. There have been various cases where PayPal's cut us off, Mint Press, etc. Small things going up to Scott Ritter just earlier this month. The FBI raiding his home.
That's a scandal.
And I think it's all of a piece right now. And that's just what's tipped me over. The Scott case and now what's happened to you is what tipped me over to thinking, man, it really is going on, because I was always so reluctant. I don't want to be paranoid. I hate the F word being overly used, fascist.
Yeah.
Like Trump is calling Harris a communist, and the Democrats are calling him a fascist. And these are words from the 20th century.
Yeah.
We need a new lexicon to describe the authoritarianism we're living in now. I don't think that's useful anymore, but people cling to it because that's like the worst thing you could say about somebody politically is you're a fascist. And from the other side, you're a communist. So, but again, this has tipped us over to this new situation that we're in. And I'm stalling here because I can't ask you any specific questions about what you were asked, which is what I really wanted to get to.
If I could just add a few things, because I really do agree with what you're saying. They've diluted and used these words so much that they have no meaning anymore. But I just wanted to say, in terms of treatment, My father was in the Met when he was very young. I think as a teenager, started as a teenager for a few years before going to the UN. And so, you know, I know, like I even told them, I know the tricks, you know, just get on with it. You trying to intimidate me and all these things. So, you know, they were very civil. Like just to be clear, they were very civil and very cheerful. That's the English way, you know.
Right.
We'll smile in your and then stick a knife not in your back but in your stomach, you know. So it's like, you know, they kill you with kindness in a sense, right? But they make you wait for a cup of water like hours. I mean, I don't want to sound dramatic or something, but I feel like this was bordering on like human rights violations, you know. Like I shouldn't have to ask, because not the second they arrested me, but you know, shortly after, I said, I've just got off the plane. I really need to go to the toilet. I really need water. Can I please have something? Okay. I'm in handcuffs. I'm, you know, at your disposal. So, you know, they say, yeah, 10 minutes. And then it's just like, it turns into hours. And they, you know, I think that I don't know if that was just against me specifically, or they treat everybody like this. Either way, it's wrong.
Power game.
Yeah.
It was
It's really so you know, it's like adding insult to injury in addition to the whole investigation. And I'm a victim of terrorism. You know, when my parents were in the UN, we were posted in Islamabad for a while, and the Egyptian embassy that was right next to the British school where I was in there when the double bombing happened. So you know, I know what terrorism is, and I reject terrorism. And to come and arrest me and then, you know, treat me like I'm some armed thug or something. I mean, this is really obscene, really obscene. And the way they dehumanize you, like, oh, take off your shoes, then take off your socks, turn the socks inside out. Can you hold them up for us, please? You know, and there's a group of police just like looking at your socks. And then, can you show us your feet, please? I mean, like, you know, I thought the things that I'm saying allegedly are the problem, not what, you know, so I'm hiding something in my shoes. I mean, this is, what can I say?
Yeah, so you're back in Vienna, that's correct?
Yeah, so they released me on unconditional bail, gave me back my passport, and I have to come back to the police station, you know, in a while, in a few months, yeah, they might. I don't know what's going to happen. They might drop it, or they might charge me. So,
Well, Richard, I mean, if there was anything that they could charge you with, they would have done it already.
yeah.
So one can assume that you might be chilled, that you might not do anything for the next 3 months in case it worsens your case. But what are you going to do for the next 3 months? Are you going to speak out or what?
Yeah, that's the question, you know. That's the question, Kathy, because I feel like that I don't know how to say it, but I feel like they released me on unconditional bail on purpose, in a sense, because they know it's not unconditional. They know that I have to shut my mouth, that, you know, I can't really do my job, and that's the worst thing for a journalist, because again, they didn't release me on bail you know, for shoplifting or something, or burglary, where you can kind of forego stealing or something, you know, for 3 months. It's my job to speak. It's my job to talk about what's going on. And the fact that I can't talk about what happened to me nor what's happening in Palestine, I mean, I think that's the, you know, the intention. They want to silence me. They want to muzzle me, and also have a chilling, you know, make sure that it has a chilling effect on other people. So they don't have to charge you in order to take away your freedom of speech and to attack freedom of the press. So yeah, it is a good question. And the problem is not that I am doing anything wrong. The problem is that the law is so abstract, and so the threshold is so low, that anything, you know, as innocent as can be, they can just skew it into something else. And you know, I don't think that's democratic. I don't think that's okay.
I was talking to Craig earlier about that, about the particular language they use is reckless as opposed to with intent. So you don't even have to intend to promote this prescribed group. If you just recklessly happen to make someone else feel that way, potentially, then you can still fall under this law, which seems to be completely beyond Orwellian. But I wanted to ask you about how effectively this type of action against yourself and against other journalists in the UK in the last few months and over the last few years, like against Craig Murray, Kit Clarenberg, Vanessa Beeley, other people, to what extent is that really crippling truly independent journalism in the UK? Do you feel it's possible for a truly independent journalist to really operate there at this point.
No, and it's not even just in the UK. I mean, I'm English, but I'm not living in the UK at the moment, and yet I have to shut my mouth. So, you know, the issue of jurisdiction here is very, very, very interesting because yeah, I think that goes without saying. So, this is the thing with these so-called terrorism cases, is that, you know, all bets are off. They can accuse you of anything, they can amplify it however they want, and then they permit themselves to also spy on you however they want and violate your human rights however they want. You know, it's like a carte blanche. It's just a blank check for them to go ahead and demonize people, and that's not what counter-terrorism laws should be. You know, should be used for. Simply, yeah, of course there's some reasonable things in the Terrorism Act to fight actual terrorism, of course, but, you know, historically we don't even have to look you know, that far back. I mean, the Terrorism Act itself is basically what they just renamed it after they used it for decades in Ireland against you know, to randomly arrest people. And you know, we all know what they did with the Guildford and you know, case. And I wanted to say 4, and then I remember what happened to their families. I'm just like, I lost count.
That's right.
That's the thing. It's so expansive, and the powers are so sweeping. So you know, I think it is important to draw a parallel and to remind people that this is not a new thing. They've been using this against people in Ireland, and similarly in Palestine. You know, a lot of the things that are happening in Palestine today are house demolitions, with withholding bodies. The Israelis don't have their own laws for this. They're using British martial law from 1945, and they took this to their own Supreme Court and said, well, you know, yeah, it's still in effect. I mean, I'm not going to get into it, but my point here is just that Britain has a history of, you know, arbitrarily detaining people or detaining people unjustly and accusing them of, you know, offenses of the highest order and trying to ruin their lives. And they don't necessarily even have to be journalists. So, you know, just to go back to your question, sorry, I drifted off a bit there, but, you know, if independent journalists can operate normally, no, absolutely not. They want everybody to fall in line. You know, you can only have one opinion. It has to be the mainstream media's opinion, the pro-Zionist, the pro-Israel opinion. And I think it's scandalous, honestly, because anyone who's English and who knows their history would understand that Zionists have nothing but contempt for England. I mean, they, you know, the biggest terrorist attack against British subjects in history was carried out by Zionists. And yeah, they, you know, the BBC won't tell you that.
Richard, have you, I mean, you're accredited by the International Federation of Journalists. Otherwise, I would never have met you in the Assange courtroom, because we had to be accredited in that way. And possibly the NUJ, the National Union of Journalists, as well. Have you been contacted by your unions? And have you been contacted by well, have you consulted a lawyer as well to understand your position, so you know what you can do in the coming months?
Yeah, that's correct. I'm accredited by the NUJ, the IFJ, also you know, some also the Austrian Union and the United Nations in Vienna. So in terms of if they contacted me, yeah, the NUJ contacted me, which is great, and I appreciate that. And I couldn't reply because, you know, it's chaos right now. I don't have my devices and nothing is working. So hopefully we can do something there. And sorry, Kathy, I forgot the last bit of your question. You asked
about you know, speaking to a lawyer as
right.
well.
Yeah, so this is very interesting. So I assumed when I was arrested, because, you know, I didn't catch when they said Section 12. I just assumed it was Schedule 7, that they were going to question me immediately and then, you know, make me hand over the passwords. So I didn't even bother, you know, it didn't even cross my mind to ask for a lawyer. When we got down to the station, so about, you know, 10, 15 minutes later, I saw just randomly a poster on the wall that says, "You need a solicitor." And I was like, you know what, I'm just going to ask, just why not? And then I asked one of the police, one of the arresting officers, and I said, am I allowed to have a solicitor? I was expecting you know, to say no, because I asked to contact my family, and they explicitly said, no, your calls are withheld. You know, they gagged me basically. So she said, the way she answered it was so funny, because she said, well, yeah, you know, it's up to you. you can have one or not. You know, she made it sound like it's an optional thing on a dinner menu or something. And I found that now that I think about it, I'm just wondering, when they arrested me, did they even mention that? Because they said, you know, anything I say can be used against me. I don't recall them mentioning that I can have a lawyer. Maybe it's just, you know, I just don't remember. So I don't want to say anything definitively. But yeah, so what happened is I was not allowed to speak to my family or a friend or call, you know, anyone to tell them I'm there. And they gave me a pamphlet. They gave me a piece of paper with, you know, police conduct. And the first thing that it says is that you have the right to tell someone that you're locked up. So I was holding it up to them and saying, it says here, I have the right to tell someone that I'm here. And you just told me that verbally. Why can't I, you know, call anyone? And they said, well, you know, it's not an absolute right. It can be withheld. It can be waived. And I was just stunned. I was like, I'm not even going to bother arguing with them. They're like, you know, primary school teachers or something. So the second thing on it was that you're allowed to have you're allowed to know why you're locked up. So again, I asked them, like, what is what is Section 12? And what organizations are, you know, alleged organizations are you talking about? And they said, oh, you know, you'll find out later, or they'll question you soon. I mean, so, you know, they didn't comply with those things at all. And it just goes to show you how not only obscene the Terrorism Act is, in the sense that you're accused of something that you haven't done, but also that they violate, you know, basic tenets of English law and human rights, you know, that you can contact someone, just tell them that you've been arrested. So I was sitting in there for hours and hours in the jail cells, like, no one even knows I'm here. No one has a clue what happened to me.
Yeah.
And I asked them for a solicitor when they were booking me. As I said before, I saw the poster, and then I asked them, and I gave them a couple of names, and I had to keep asking, like, you know, because if someone would come and check on you in the cell every, I don't know, 45 minutes, they, you know, pull the slit down and just look. So they'd ask, are you okay? And I'd say, well, no, because I'm not allowed to speak to my family, and I need a solicitor. Did you call a solicitor? And they'd say, well, your calls are withheld. And then I'd have to, you know, I wasn't sure if I was right, but I'd tell them, I thought my calls were withheld in terms of family, not a solicitor. And then, you know, it's like you're just going back and forth every 45 minutes with someone, or they'd say, yeah, sure, I'll check, and then they never come back. But finally, after a few hours, yeah, I did get a call from a solicitor, and they said that they would call me back in an hour if they were able to successfully contact my family. So I waited in the cell, and I waited in the cell, and nothing. So I asked if I could call. And then they took me to the box. It's like, they come to the cell, they open the door, they walk you down the hallway, and then there's a cubicle, like, with, you know, with a door, and it's a bare room with a phone. So I got on the phone with the lawyer, and they told me that they had tried to call, you know, an hour or 2 hours ago, but just didn't get through. And then apparently they tried to call a second time. I don't know when, but that also didn't get through. And in the morning, this is really interesting. So I got woken up by this noise, someone saying there's a call. And I was like, a call in the cell? I don't know where the voice was coming from. I think it came out of the sink. But yeah, really. And then they said it's your lawyer. And then before I heard anything, you hear this robot saying, this call is being monitored. And I was like, hold on, that can't be right. You can't monitor a call between me and my lawyer. And the solicitor refused to take the call, just said no, and hung up. And so I asked one of the guards, is it okay if I call the solicitor? You know, basically take me outside so I can do it privately. Never happened. So I did get to speak to a solicitor, and you know, they helped me, but there are also some moments that were really far from okay.
Well, that sounds very irregular. Have you spoken to your parents about
Yeah.
this? What do they think?
I mean, they're just happy that I'm out, and yeah, well, you know, I guess they yeah, they're just happy I'm out. That's it, really. And we're also trying to figure out, like, what to do, because again, you know, journalism is my livelihood, and I feel very passionately about what's happening, and I'm afraid that anything I say, you know, can be used against me, and they've got this, you know, case hanging over my head. So I'm grateful for their support and for your support. It's been overwhelming, really. I'm so thankful, because I don't say this like just as a cliche or something, but it really isn't just about me. This is, they're trying to make an example out of me, so it scares other people, and they might start doing this to others too. It didn't even dawn on me for a while that I was arrested. I thought, my mind just like didn't grasp that I'd been actually arrested, not detained. I mean, which even being detained is bad enough, but it's just good to be out. And yeah, I'm grateful for the support from my parents. They have the same
Richie,
positions as me, and yeah.
Richie, has any of your funding been cut off, or are people still able to look after you?
Everything's all right, thankfully. Yeah,
Oh,
everything's
good.
okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
You were not formally charged with anything then. I mean,
No, so this is pre-charge bail, and they might charge me at any second or in 3 months. I don't know.
well, do you really
So,
think they will? You see, in talking to Craig, I think that this is pure intimidation. I don't think they want, and Craig felt they didn't want to put a case like yours or even his previous in front of a jury, especially when it deals with Gaza right now. There's a lot of popular opinion against what the British government is doing, and amongst other governments, in supporting that. So I think it's intimidation. I don't think they're going. That's my feeling. Of course, we never know. That they just trying to bother you and scare you and to stop doing what you're doing. I don't think it's going to work.
no, it's not going to work, Joey. That stuff doesn't work on us. I held my head high the entire time. I was just basically thinking of like what you would say, what Kathy would say, what my mom would say, what everyone would say. And I knew that people, they perhaps didn't know in that moment yet what was going on, but once they found out, they would be supportive. And so I felt like I mean, I don't want to dramatize it or something like that, but I felt like there was kind of a connection with me being in the cell and the people being in the Israeli cells. Although of course those conditions are a million times worse, and it's incomparable. But just in terms of that we're in a global struggle against genocide, and I completely reject everything the police have said. I think it's outrageous, and even with their low threshold, I've done nothing wrong. Yeah, so I don't know how it's going to be from now on, I'm not going to stop speaking out against what's happening in Palestine, because it's really the most chilling thing in our lifetimes. And I thought Iraq was bad. I mean,
I completely agree with that. The stronger and more influential our media gets, there's no reverse gear with these people. They become more repressive. Obviously, Julian's case, absolutely right, can't get any worse than that. But they will not take what we're saying into consideration and realize they got to back off. They have to change, have to be some reform. I've never seen this type of bloody mindedness in government before, and both sides of the Atlantic here and in Germany, and it's just unbelievable.
Yeah.
That also goes to
really.
show how much influence Israel has over all of these governments as well, directly, as opposed to maybe other issues where they might not be willing to cross that line. I mean, under Obama administration wasn't willing to go after Assange. I mean, I think it takes a special degree of influence to kind of have them be this overtly authoritarian. So,
well, don't forget, Obama did try to frame him in Obama's administration in Iceland, and it didn't work. Right. So that's when they said, okay, First Amendment, we can't do it because that failed. Because the Icelandic the interior minister threw the FBI out of Iceland where they were trying to set him up. So they tried to get him. But you're right. Obama did not do it in the end. He didn't arm the Ukrainian government because he knew there were crazies there, which he meant Azov and these types. Obama said this on the record. He didn't want to give them. And yet we've seen now, of course, the subsequent governments, what they're doing, and it's just incredibly troubling. But the public opinion, Richie, is really where this lies in the end, isn't it?
Yeah, really. And I think that's why it's important for all of the media to push back, whether we're talking about Julian's case, or we're talking about Craig being detained, or Kit Clarenberg, or David Miranda, or Scott Ritter being raided. I mean, this is an assault on the press, and never mind what's happening in Gaza. I mean, journalists being decapitated in Gaza. I mean, what is the world coming to? I mean, am I maybe a bit too naive that I expected better? I mean, we're really not asking for much here, especially we are the countries that keep lecturing everybody about freedom of the press. We sure don't seem to have much respect for it. It's not worth much if you have to toe the government line. But it really is shocking what's happening everywhere. I mean, I thought that you have to imagine, because I'm following what's happening in France in French. I speak it fluently, and I can hear how bad it is. And ironically, we're actually, how can I put this? The French are actually like 20 years, I would say, behind where we are right now, because they're still stuck in this anti-Semitism phase. Like every single critique is anti-Semitism. That's the only thing they discuss. Everything is responded to, or rather, everything is, every reply is that's anti-Semitism. So we've actually come a long way, I feel, because that word used to be, it used to stop all kinds of talk. But Germany, they've really, they started to show their fascist colors yet again. The way they treat, some of the people in these protests, the videos that we've seen, is horrific. It's like it's the Gestapo. I mean, and honestly, it's not just a German thing. I think it's unfair to just pile it on them, because when I got taken off the plane, I felt like it was the Gestapo. They just had better suits.
Yeah.
That it's really this is not okay. This is really, really not okay. And it's not just, as I said, it's not just in one country. We're witnessing it globally, as you said, on both sides of the Atlantic.
Yeah.
Where is this? Where is this going? What's the conclusion? Because are they going to throw all of us in prison? Do they think they'll get away with that? Do they think everyone's going to shut up about the genocide? I think they've overplayed their hand, and they're
Undoubtedly.
Yeah.
We're living in world historical crime, this genocide. We're in a time of a genocide. And if you don't stand up against, this is your moment. This is the moment for everyone to
Yeah.
show where you stand. And we're learning now. We always knew that the U.S. would support Israel unconditionally. But there was a thought, at least in the back of my head, that they could one day go too far and then they would have to. And they haven't cut off the support. No matter how plain this is to anyone with a heart and a mind and eyes to see. And they will continue to do that. And they've overplayed their hand there in the support. And now what they're trying to do to shut people like you up, which will not work. That's why I say it's the public, because they are growing more and more fed up with this. These guys have exposed themselves. It doesn't matter. It could be conservative or labor here. It's the same as the U.S. Republican, Democrat. They're both going to continue to support Israel, no matter what they do. And they are digging their own political graves.
Yeah.
If there's anything that a politician they'd throw their mother under a bus before they would try to lose an election. And yet they will not break their support for this country, no matter what it does. It's the most extraordinary thing. And you're standing on the right side here by speaking out, and we're going to suffer whatever consequences we have to. And you have suffered. But I just hope that they're just trying to intimidate, and there's no case legally. This is not a terrorism case. Although that law is so draconian, it's even worse than the U.S. Espionage Act, the way it's written. It's shocking.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it really is.
Look, when you look at some of the people who've come under attack, some of our best, and I'm not talking about a particular country. There's people in the US, there's people in the UK, but you personally have been asked to stand for a political party, and now you have also been harassed, but you haven't been charged. So you must be doing something right, Richie. I wouldn't worry too much about it.
That's what he said before. That's what he's
Yes.
And that is something that you could sleep at night. And I don't know about them, to be honest with you. Anyway, we're just veering off into polemics here. But I appreciate your time with us, Richie, and for sharing whatever you could with us. And just know that there was a lot of people supporting you, and they're outraged by what has happened, and they keep speaking out about it.
And we'll keep watching it very closely.
Yeah.
Thank you. It means the world to me. It really does. Thank you. I'm very grateful. It's an honor to be here with you.
And this is Joe Lauria speaking from London for CN Live, and we'll see you soon with our next program, which actually will be Friday. We're going to do a live show wrapping up the Democratic National Convention in Chicago. So that should be good on Friday, and we'll give you the details of that. So until then, for CN Live, this is Joel Laurie. Goodbye.
Get out your notebook. There's more.
If you are a consumer of independent news, then the first place you should be going to is Consortium News, and please do try to support them when you can. It doesn't have its articles behind a paywall. It's free for everyone. It's one of the best news sites out there, and it's been in the business of independent journalism and adversarial independent journalism for over 2 decades. I hope that with the public's continuing support of Consortium News, it will continue for a very long time to come. Thank you so much.